Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the broadcast. This is Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast tonight. I'm going to be talking about meta communication and 13 things not to say to your children. I think if you got the invite to this, if you're watching the live webinar version of this, you saw it as 12 things not to say to your children. I thought of one other thing not to say to your child. It's Monday, February 3rd, 2020. This is one of my favorite topics because I think there's so much in our unconscious communication that we're not aware of. It's more than just how it gets interpreted, right? It's more than just how people hear it or kind of the relative nature of communication. It's really a biological or a physiological survival instinct that a lot of this communication speaks to. That if the young child or child, for that matter, perceives a threat, then the possibility exists that they might not survive. Right? That's the core kind of instinct that if we're left alone, we all talk about the idea about being rejected, feeling alone, being accepted. And we talk about that, I think, from the level of psychological well-being and health. And I think that's an appropriate level to talk about it from. But the fact of the matter is that it is a fundamental instinct of ours to fit into a group, to belong. And that without parents, without fitting into a group, we as a species are pretty weak. So it goes to that level, to that core level. So I'll talk about developmental psychology as it relates to metacommunication. I love this topic tonight. First of all, let's talk about metacommunication. Metacommunication is really a simple way of saying what is really meant, right? The underlying or the deeper meaning of what we communicate. Metacommunication, discovering hidden agendas in our communication. The goal of these communication skills is to uncover what we're really saying, right? We're communicating emotions. We're communicating a difference in power. We're communicating something. Have you ever, I'm sure everybody, I shouldn't even ask it as a question. Everybody on this broadcast has the experience where you hear an interaction between two people that aren't you, somebody else, and somebody has a reaction to what is said. And your response is, that's not at all what was said. That's not at all what I think they communicated. And we might even say that. We might even stumble and put our proverbial foot in our mouth and say that that's not what was meant. But what we don't understand is the context. And metacommunication takes in context. A large part of our training as therapists is learning to perceive the process of communication over the content of communication. And in our own relationships, it can be difficult at times. Right? I just had a parent-teacher conference with one of my children this afternoon, and one of the things that the teacher shared was that one of my children was expressing microaggressions with some of her behavior. And I asked my daughter, I said, is that something you were aware of? And she said, I had no idea. But now that you pointed out, it does make sense that I was kind of passive aggressively communicating what I was feeling. So it's not easy to recognize it, and it takes a certain amount of vulnerability to own it, because we hide behind the content, right? Our defense is well built around it and with the content. The meta message refers to the meaning of the communication or the message beneath the message. We all know what it feels like when our parent or spouse says one thing to us and it means something else, like I was talking about before. This meaning could be intended or subconscious on the part of the person saying it. And either way, its weight is worthy of conversation. Right? It's an important conversation to have. And if we are not defended, right? If we're open to the process, then we can hear what the other person's experience is without necessarily compromising or changing our position, but we can hear what it sounds like. And I think in a lot of cases, we can become more aware of how the way that we communicate, what it really is communicating at times. Honesty, self-awareness, and transparent dialogue are the simplest ways to improve the consistency between what is said and what is meant. I think a safe place to begin to have that dialogue is in therapy. I was in the middle of our parent-teacher conference that we just had. The teacher made some apologies to my daughter. And she even expressed some fear around it, saying she was sorry, because she said, in the past, parents have used that against me. And I reassured her, I said, I spend my life encouraging parents to make an apology to their children as often as possible, while at the same time being allowed to, being encouraged, being empowered to maintain their boundaries, their sense of self, right? Their inalienable rights to be themselves. We can often discover the meta message by asking ourselves tough questions about our intent. The I feel statement can uncover our authentic motivations. I think, and I've come to believe this over the years more and more and more, and I've spoken to this many times on these broadcasts, that the I feel statement is much more effective as an intrapsychic tool. In other words, kind of uncovering the parts of ourselves. It's much more effective as an intrapsychic tool, much more valuable in understanding ourselves than it is in communicating between two people. And that the depth at which we come to understand ourselves, the more effectively we can communicate with another person and hear another person, which is really the harder part of communication. Healthy communication ultimately is about bringing integrity to what we are saying and what we are meaning. As I have grown older, I have been able to bring more and more integrity to what I'm saying and what I'm feeling. And it's not because I'm particularly gifted or enlightened. It's because I've done a lot of work. I've explored my own fears, insecurities, and vulnerabilities. I've become more comfortable with them. And because of that, I can be more honest with other people. And so even in moments where I say something hurtful, unkind, sarcastic, passive aggressive, the list goes on. If I'm challenged, I'm more likely today than I was 10 or 15 years ago. I'm more likely able to say, this is what I was really feeling. I was really feeling scared or hurt or sad or embarrassed. And I was trying to protect myself in these ways. And that's really what the work is about, right? But that takes, for me, and for most of us, it takes a more secure foundation. So I came up with this broadcast originally a few years ago when I was asked by a reporter to talk about things to not say to your children. In fact, they asked me and some other therapists, list 2 things that we ought not to say to our children. And I actually listed 20 to begin with. Some of them are kind of combined in tonight's broadcast to where I have 13. But I realize there are so many things that are so common that we say that can also be so harmful. So I'm going to go through my list of 13 things not to say, which some might be obvious and some might be more subtle and some might be more about not necessarily the words that we use, but the meta communication, the meaning behind the words. The first one is don't feel ... For some of you, that's an obvious one, meaning that you know that gets said often. For others of you, you might say, well, why would anybody ever say that? I cannot overstate how common don't feel messages are. And I won't say it's completely the thing, but so constantly I'm talking with adults in therapy where they describe the unspoken rules about what you were and were not allowed to feel: anger, sadness. I have one adult client who said in her family growing up, any negative, so-called negative feeling was not allowed. And then anytime you express sadness or hurt or pain or anger, you were immediately asked to look on the bright side and to see the positive intention or what somebody else probably meant, to erase those painful, uncomfortable, darker feelings. This statement is insidious because it is usually expressed covertly. Don't feel, that is. When a child expresses anger or frustration at school, teachers, siblings, or the parent tells them not to feel it by trying to reason them out of it. In other words, they say things like, look at it this way, or you shouldn't hate your brother, or these kids were just jealous of you. I was just trying to help you, right? There's just so many common ways that it gets spoken. And in our minds, we don't think that that's what's happening, but really a lot of this work, I mean, a good portion of this work, maybe as much as 40% of it for us parents, spouses, is learning to be present with our own feelings and then learning to be present with other people's feelings. And that is a superpower that largely goes unrecognized, unheralded in our culture, in most cultures. Learning to sit with what somebody else feels without trying to talk them out of it. All of the messages that I just described contain the meta message, meaning beneath the message. They contain the message of don't feel what you are feeling. The simplest way to ask yourself, and it takes some honesty and some courage, what the meta message is to ask yourself, what's the intention of what I'm saying? Why am I saying this? And if you're honest with yourself, you'll often discover sometimes some of these messages. The opposite is listening without judgment and without the need for the child to feel anything other than what they are feeling. I don't know why I'm feeling the inclination tonight. I think it's because I'm aware that there are so many people attending and listening to these broadcasts that aren't necessarily parents of children in our program, but these are just as relevant to our significant others, our relationship with our spouses and partners. The same kinds of dilemmas show up in those relationships or with brothers and sisters or your own parents. One of the most common things adults tell me in therapy about their childhood is that a feeling or certain feelings or certain feeling were not allowed in their home of their childhood. So we learn to contain people. We learn to hear them. We learn to allow them to feel what we're feeling. But because we have instinct and wiring to fix it, to make it better, we have such discomfort around our own empathic misery, I like to call it. Our own anxiety is triggered. We feel compelled to respond in other ways besides containing ways, which are curious, patient, compassionate, understanding, loving, non-judgmental ways. This containing requires capacity. While psychological techniques and descriptions of behaviors don't require as much, they don't require a lot of capacity. Pointing out somebody's thinking error requires virtually no capacity to speak up. Correcting somebody's twist thinking, pointing out the devil's advocate position or look on the bright side, right? Those don't take a lot of capacity, and containing does take quite a bit. Listening, being patient, sitting with it. Number 2, you're too sensitive. This wasn't the exact phrase my mother used growing up, but there was definitely that message growing up, that when I was feeling, and I felt a lot, and a lot of our children feel a lot. A lot of the children in our program, when I say children, I mean young adults and adolescents feel a lot. Spouses, adults feel a lot. The best way to deal with one's inadequacy around sitting with and becoming that capable container is just to tell the other person something is wrong with them, right? It's kind of like gaslighting. You're overreacting. You're being too sensitive. It's just another way of saying don't feel. But really what it is I'm overwhelmed in the presence of your feelings. The meta message is something's wrong with you. Something's screwy in your head. And the child learns to doubt themselves and their truth. Folks, most all of us say this. We're all guilty of it to some extent. In fact, the less guilty you are of this, the more aware you are of the few times that it comes through. If you think you're not guilty of this, you're more likely to be consistently guilty of this, right? It is. We were just in an airport. I think I said this the other day. I was talking to somebody because I hadn't had the broadcast. I was sitting in the airport with my wife in the Delta Sky Lounge in Minneapolis on the way home from New York City. And this couple and 2 of their young children walked by, and I was doing something on my phone or kind of minding my own business. My wife said, "Did you hear that?" And I said, "No." She said that father just told that young child to not be upset. The child said that they were upset, and the dad said, "Don't be upset." It was actually the child said, "I feel bad." That's what the child said. "I feel bad." And the dad said, "Don't feel bad." Again, maybe on the very thin slice of a surface, some of us might think that there's a virtue in that kind of what we would twist into thinking as consolation. But as they walked by and walked out of the Delta Sky Lounge, my wife said, "It's just incredible, isn't it?" And I was saying, of course, it's universal. We get told what to feel. We tell our children what to feel. And so saying somebody's too sensitive, you're selfish. It's similar, right? A lot of times what makes these comments so insidious, so destructive, is that we think we're doing it for the child's best interest. So we don't even just do it and then imagine ourselves to be neutral. We actually do it and think it a virtue and try to convince our child that we're doing something loving, virtuous for them. You know, you're too selfish is another way to say to a child, you know, your needs are too much, something's wrong with them. It's really fundamentally, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I can't give you what you need. And instead of dealing with that sense of inadequacy inside of me, which is a really, really hard thing to deal with as a parent, as a boyfriend, a girlfriend, partner, spouse, significant other, brother, sister, because it's so hard to deal with that in this relationship, I'm going to make you wrong. And when my clients, when people accuse them of being selfish in their lives, what I say to them is, I would never, virtually ever, I can't think of an example where I would want you to do something that I didn't think was going to benefit you in the long run. Some of them might be uncomfortable in the short run, right? In the short game, it might be a sacrifice. But I would never give you an assignment, offer a suggestion, not ideally, not if I'm doing well. I would never ask you to do anything that I didn't think would benefit you in the long run, right? Helping somebody across the street, I would encourage that because it brings you a sense of joy and meaning, connection and love and gratitude, so forth and so on. So again, this is something that I remember about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. I was so frustrated with my youngest and I called her selfish. And this is not something that escaped me very often. This is one that I have some competency around. And there was this strange silence in the room because there were 2 or 3 children present. My wife was my wife was present. And my wife said to me after this awkward pause, she said, "What was that you just said?" And I said, "I just don't know. I think I just got overwhelmed." And it just leaked out. And it was ridiculous, right? It's an absurd thing to offer or to suggest to a child. Most people lose themselves in childhood and spend the rest of their lives trying to find that inner child, that authentic self, right? We ask children to deny their needs because they overwhelm us. The thing that's really happening here is that the parent's capacity is limited and they are asking the child to get smaller to fit within the narrow bandwidth that the parent has access to at that time. And again, our bandwidth varies over time and throughout the day, so it's not consistent. And this is one of the ways that we ask our other to get smaller. Next one, I do everything for you. There's some typos in this one. I apologize. I do everything for you, or even I would do anything for you. First of all, it's not true. And it's not even an ideal, right? Even though so much of the work that I do with you all is child-centered, that must be built on the foundation of an adequate, healthy adult self, which not all of us have. Right? Most of us have pieces of that missing because of our own inadequate parents and inadequate childhood, less than perfect childhood. So it's not even an ideal. And in many cases, we strive for this. Mothers more than fathers often, right? Because it's culturally expected of them. It is part of the feminine, right? To sacrifice self for other from the very start of life. They're giving up their body after birth. They're giving up feeding the child from themselves, right? It's there, it's intrinsic. But it's not ideal. It's a threat to the child, and it gives the child an overwhelming sense, an overwhelming burden that they have to take care of the parent. That's the irony. One of the most damaging things, I talk about this idea of the unlived life of a parent, the inadequate self of a parent. Because then the child has to carry it. And it leaves no place for the child to be hurt, not angry, and upset, right? If I am a saint, if you are my child, and I am a saint, then if you're upset, disappointed, hurt, angry, frustrated, you must be crazy. That's the only conclusion that can be drawn if I'm a saint, if I'm perfect. A healthier place is I'm fallible. I have limited resources. I struggle. I am impatient sometimes. I do snap. I do leak. I do regress. More than you even know. More than I'm aware of. And so when you're upset with me, if I've made peace with my fallibility, then you're allowed to be upset with me. If I haven't made peace with my fallibility, if I still think the goal is to be this ideal, perfect object, completely selfless, then any of your frustration, anger, sadness, hurt, disappointment in me is going to be a significant threat to me. If mom and dad are selfless, I say, if they do everything for me, then how can I be angry at them? My anger and hurt must be concealed and repressed, and it must be a flaw in me. You're just like your father or your mother. This can be in highly conflictual divorces, but it also can be in marriages. It's a way of justifying, it's a way of expressing disdain without overtly discussing it. It's a way of a parent not owning the relationship that they have with the co-parent and triangulating or putting the child in the middle. And it's passive aggressive, microaggression, right? It's not okay. Now, if you mean it for positive, it's a totally different thing. But I'm suggesting it in the context of when parents talk about a child's struggles, especially in our program, and says it's because of their father, it's because of their mother. The fact of the matter is, even if the father or mother has a significant amount of contribution to it, you talking this way creates a divided loyalty, an either or for the child, a split in the child. To express loyalty and love to you, they have to then be angry at, blaming towards, set against the co-parent. And it's important to know that even when we express disdain for the other, and in some cases the other can be extraordinarily abusive or neglectful, extraordinary, the child still has some identification with that father or that mother. And so while we might imagine, we might deny the reality of the idea that we can express our derision or anger or frustration toward our co-parent, our ex-spouse, and that it will be contained there. the child still sees that parent as a part of them. Doesn't matter what they say, it's still part of them. I remember not my first professor, but one of my favorite professors, she used to treat small children. And one of the things that she taught us very early on, I've talked about this before, is that when a child came into the meeting with a teddy bear, that she treated the teddy bear like it was the child. And in a way, it is the child. It's the child's identity with the teddy bear that it's a part of them. So the child will internalize your anger, your dislike toward your co-parent as being about them. And also, it's just another way of shaming them to try to get them into cooperation. Another thing not to say is you make me feel. Right? Not owning our own feelings. Now, this is particularly challenging for us parents at Evoke because our children are struggling with mental health issues and addiction. And those issues are extraordinarily taxing on anybody who loves the child. So it's a heavy weight to carry, a heavy relationship to be in. So we would argue that any reasonable person would be made to feel a certain way in the face of such issues. And while it's still true that any reasonable person would be made to feel, it's still your responsibility. That's why we provide so much parent support. It's not because you're the cause of all evil, not at all, but because you need more support when you have a child with a learning difference, with a mental health issue, a child that's different than you, a child with an addiction. You need more support to be able to show up for the child. So the idea is to learn to own your feelings. You're modeling responsibility, right? When we blame other people for what we're feeling and make that our focus, we're teaching our children to do the same thing. You know, they could say the same to us, and they do say the same to us. When I was talking to my child's teacher today, what I wanted to say to her, and I didn't have the time, was I wanted to say, I don't live in a world, not at least, right, what I strive for, what the ideal that I strive for. I don't live in a world where this is a right or wrong zero-sum game. I aspire to a place where you get to be you and feel what you feel, and I get to be me and feel what I feel. That's the ideal that I strive for. I fall short of that consistently, constantly. But that's what I strive for. And it just demonstrates a lack of awareness of our own intrapsychic processes. By the way, I don't say this on this slide, but I want to make this point. I think that sometimes when we talk about not saying things like you make me feel happy, sad, scared, frustrated, angry, whatever it is, that then we assume that the opposite of that is I choose to feel happy, sad, scared, angry, frustrated, etc. And I don't think that's true also. The example that I've given many, many times, if you go to pat me on the shoulder and I kind of shrink or kind of twitch out of a fear that's wired into me, it wouldn't be accurate to say, maybe I've been abused by my father, but it wouldn't be accurate to say that I'm choosing to be afraid of your touch, but it is mine to cope with and deal with. And if I go to therapy and if I work on it, I can learn that everybody who touches me on the shoulder is not trying to hurt me. So in that way, over time, long periods of time, I can choose not to feel afraid when you touch me, but it's not accurate to say we choose to feel happy, sad, scared, frustrated, angry, disappointed, embarrassed, etc. I think to reduce it to choose to feel doesn't make any sense at all. It's really no more insightful or enlightened than you make me feel. Neither one is true. Ownership is that middle ground, that middle path. It's mine to own, mine to feel. A great reference, if you want to read more about this, is the 4 Agreements, where he talks about in one of the agreements. So, You should. Essentially, part of therapy, the result of therapy would result in the lack of the word should in virtually every situation, any situation of weight, right? Should and should not. They have no place in psychological development and evolution. And again, it's not just merely avoiding the word, but it's the thought process. Should doesn't even make any sense. Well, I don't even know what it means. And so when somebody's doing therapy with me and they're using the word should, my response is, I hear that, but it's getting in the way of me understanding who you are. I know you shouldn't have reacted that way and you shouldn't feel that way and you should be able to do this and you should be able to do that, but you can't and you don't and you aren't. So can we spend some time with what is instead of what ought not to be? That's the easy stuff, right? It's really not hard to learn shoulds and shouldn'ts. We all learn it. It's so funny out in the field. 3 or 4 weeks into the program, your kids are shoulding all over each other, right? Parents sometimes think that's what kids need to learn, is what they should do. But that's not the way that therapy thinks of it. Therapy thinks of it as healing instead of a moral imperative. Your children, I know that they've been listening to your lectures because they give them to each other relatively quickly. They become what they think are these junior therapists with each other, giving advice and shooting on each other. It's really about developing a sense of self and self-efficacy, right? Self-mastery. And when we learn to love, not because we should love, but because we do love. We learn to be kind, not because we should be kind, but because we have kindness to give. We learn to work hard, not because we should work hard, but because it's what we want, right? That's the outcome of the development of a healthy self. So it's the same outcomes, but it doesn't come from this place of guilt and shame and pressure and imperative morality. It comes from a place of developing who you are. It's the difference between being right versus being a self. Your thoughts, your experiences, and beliefs. The next one is you never or you always. I don't think I need to talk a lot about this. These are, I think, pretty easy ones for most of us and not new to most of us. First of all, always and never they're just not true in most cases, right? It's overwhelming to hear that. It's hard to be on the receiving end of always and never. And in lieu of always and never, you just share the specific content. See, the reason why we struggle with just sharing the specific content about the feeling, instead of saying you're always late, you never respect my time, instead of saying that and saying something like, well, gosh, I'm frustrated and disappointed that you were late tonight, is because people try to talk us out of it. It's not enough. We're told that we're being too sensitive or overreacting. So we have to paint a really bleak picture of the other one's behavior so as to justify the frustration and the feeling that we have, right? But if we grow up or get cooked in the soup of being a self, if we learn to repair some of our own childhood wounds and start to raise our children in the soup of being a self instead of being right, then people just get to feel what they're feeling and they don't have to justify it by extreme positions, exaggerations. The next one, so-and-so said, or everyone thinks, or Dr. Reedy said. We call this recruiting, right? Everybody thinks so. This is what everybody says. This is what the experts or Dr. Reedy said. So much, virtually all that I teach you all, I would never encourage you to use in a discussion with your children or with your spouse or partner or siblings or anybody. If it's true, it's true. If it's not, it's not. The fact that I said it is somewhat inconsequential, because I'm kind of crazy sometimes and very, very fallible and often wrong. So it comes from a place where we weren't allowed to just be ourselves. We had to be right. We had to prove it. We had to recruit experts and books, right? All of my friends' parents let them go out. Everybody thinks you're overreacting. Other parents, other families do it this way. You've been on the receiving end of that, but you've also been on the sending end of that. It's just a fundamentally different sensibility to be a self. We replace these phrases with requests, boundaries, and feeling statements. This is what it's like for me. I don't like mushrooms. And I really don't want to have a discussion about it again. And I might be wrong. I might be crazy. You're right. I might not have tasted your grandmother's recipe for fried mushrooms. And I'm okay with that. I get to be me. Here's my boundary. These other recruitments are about being right and making the other person wrong. And just because more people are saying it and experts believe it, and even Dr. Reedy says it, doesn't make it true. I did this today with my daughter. This one is you feel, and then you basically take away somebody's defense and you pierce their armor and you expose their vulnerable feelings. My therapist taught me many years ago that children need their dignity, and that we would be wise to not expose children before they were ready to expose themselves. It's kind of like outing somebody, right? It's their right to out themselves. Ideally, we provide a safe place, a safe context for them to out themselves, whether there be something as significant and personal as their sexual orientation, which is where that phrase comes from, or something more everyday, very typical, very average, like how they're feeling: scared, embarrassed, sad, hurt, powerless, jealous, afraid, whatever it is. We do it because it's our need, not theirs, right? It makes us feel good. So we can maintain our boundaries with what we know, what we believe, without exposing them. In attachment theory, we talk about serve and return behaviors, right? Meeting them where they're at, meeting them on their level. And when we were having a parent-teacher conference, I embarrassed my daughter today, foolishly. And at one point, I suggested that my daughter be allowed to leave the room so that we could just talk amongst us adults, because it wasn't okay for me to do what I did. We do this because setting boundaries are harder. We want to prove what's going on with the other person as a justification for our boundary, instead of just operating from a boundary in a place of, this is my boundary, this is my feeling. Right? It's about being an adult and not requiring the child's approval, the child's agreement, consensus on the issue at hand. The next one, you're so smart, talented, and gifted. I didn't know this one until many years of being a therapist. Probably until about 10 or 15 years ago. I didn't know that it ruins kids. There's great research by Dr. Carol Dweck on the growth mindset. You can Google it. DWECK, Carol Dweck. In the book Nurture Shock, there's a chapter on the inverse power of praise. The research tells us that when we tell children that they're smart, talented, and gifted, that it ruins them, that it puts pressure on them, that there's nowhere to go but down from there. That when we tell them they're smart and talented, that they're more likely to cheat or choose easier tasks because the risk of failure is too great. Everything rests on them maintaining that place, that on the pedestal of being smart or gifted. So we learn to praise effort, right? We learn to praise something that they're in control of. When children's effort are praised over their talents or gifts, they tend to choose more challenging tasks. They tend to cheat less. They tend to take healthy risks. The other thing that happens is that children start to equate praise with love and affection, right? It gives them a sense of belonging. The next one is I'm proud of you. And this is a sometimes thing. This is a Dr. Brad Reedy thing. I try and steer away from this because so many times it loads very heavy on the child. It's not their job to make me proud, right? It's not their job to live their life for me. And there's something about the phrase I'm proud of you that almost makes it about me, the father, that my child then becomes a reflection of me. And that conversely, the child can embarrass me, humiliate me, disappoint me. And think about the harm that's more obvious in that. The somewhat the inverse of being proud of. What if my child is struggling with an addiction, an active addiction, or an active eating disorder, or a learning difference, or a mental health issue? Can I still be proud of them? And is that even important? I think I've said this to you. My mother tells me these days, she's told me for the last 10 or 15 years how proud of me that she is. And there's no disrespect intended in what I'm saying, but it doesn't matter to me. It's not, I gave up some time ago, actually when I was a teenager. I gave up some time ago trying to make my mother proud. It was a destructive influence on my life to worry about what my mother and father thought about me. And it doesn't give me a sense of true north, of a moral compass in my life. She believes and has different values than me. And I try not to do that with my children. I don't always do it. And there's been a few times, I would say about once or twice a year, I might say to somebody, there's no other word to say it except for that I'm proud of you. But it's a rarity, and it's not their job. Again, it tends to equate praise with love. It tends to suggest the opposite, which is that our children can make us unproud. Like I said, it's not their job to make you feel proud. Tends to make it about you and not about them. They start to seek an external reference point for esteem, right? It sets them up, it wires them to be more susceptible and vulnerable to peer pressure. Because it's so easy to disappoint mother and father, and therefore I'm going to seek out peers where I feel accepted. The idea is to value the whole person, to help children understand that all parts of them have value and meaning and richness to them. And that even in their mistakes, right, even in their wounds, there's some wisdom, some strength, and some energy. And being proud doesn't tend to emphasize the value of mistakes. There's so much value in the mistakes, in the detours. Next one, I was doing the best I could with the best of intentions. Those are kind of two statements. It's a subtle way of dismissing somebody's hurt. Why are you saying it? And essentially, we say those things because if you can see it from my perspective, you won't be angry, you won't be hurt. Whenever I'm doing work with anybody and I hear somebody say, well, they didn't have negative intentions or bad intentions, my response is their intention was to protect their own anxiety. That's the intention. There's no virtue in that, right? There's no necessarily negative quality in that, but that is what it is. It's just that. And so intentions doesn't matter. It's just, are they hurt? Are they upset? Are they angry? And they get to be that way. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to capitulate. and change my behavior, but they get to feel that way. It's a subtle way of trying to erase somebody else's feelings. It's how we are asked to navigate our parents' defenses. I had a client tell me not too long ago this idea that that they can talk to their father, but they have to be careful and kind of manage and say it the right way. And they were saying this in a sense to try to indicate or describe to me how healthy the relationship was. And I said, it still sounds like you have to navigate your father's defenses. Again, there's no great sin in that, but there's no virtue in that either. It's just there's an awareness that your father's defenses are at play. And as you grow up, you're going to expose your parents' immaturity. That's part of the process. We learn to be wrong. You know, we get good at losing. Getting good at losing is the most freeing place to be. And we model vulnerability because of the strength that's beneath it. And ultimately, oftentimes it still wasn't good enough. You know, when we hurt somebody, it still is less than ideal, and that's okay. It doesn't make us, you know, we don't have to be condemned because we're human. We're just human. So some things to say. I'm just going to read off this list of things to say. I am sorry. I was wrong. Thanks for telling me. Keep talking. I'm glad you told me. I feel honored you would share this with me. And when bad behavior shows up, asking the question, how are you? Or when bad behavior shows up, asking the question of, I want to understand. That makes sense. I would do the same thing if I were you. I don't know. I'm not sure. Let me think about it and get back. I need a timeout. And this is mine, not yours. These phrases, these ideas, these ways of communicating do two things. They demonstrate that the individual saying them has developed an adequate sense of self, number one. Number two, they provide an extraordinarily safe place to be for the other. So it's not just about the skill, but it's developing enough of yourself to be able to say those things and have them be genuine. So what are the take-home messages? Do your work so they don't have to do it for you, right? And that goes for all of us. That's our life's mission, is to do our work, whatever it is, healing ourselves, uncovering and unraveling our own childhood wounds, and we all have some, so that other people, particularly our children, don't have to do that work for us, don't have to compensate for us. Consider what happens if your children don't share with you, right? If you're not in a safe container. Decide what you can handle and own it, right? And in my family, in my life, I don't mind profanity. It doesn't bother me. My children don't swear hardly ever, but it wouldn't bother me if they did. But there's also some moments in the day when I can't take much at all. But it's mine to own. And wherever the line is that you want to take, you're allowed to take it. You just own it as yours. And that's different than being right. It's just yours. If I was in your home and profanity wasn't allowed, that's the rule that I would live by, or I would deal with the consequences. Right? It's okay. If you have to go to church on Sunday or synagogue on Saturday, that's the rule. But it's yours to own. Decide what you're willing to tolerate and then own it. Do enough of your work so that you know what you're saying, so that you more and more throughout time bring into integrity what you're really meaning and what the words are that are coming out of your mouth. And if we learn to listen more, really listen in deep ways that these ideas tonight suggest, children will end up telling us all that we need to know. And we'll hear better. Listening is the thing that we need. The children need more than lectures, solutions, sermons, answers, pep talks, reframes, rebuttals, justification, or explanations. I think a lot of parents are hoping that the child will be open to all those other things, but They just don't need it. Somewhere in the ratio of 1 to 20. 1 part lecture or pep talk to 20 parts listening. Get comfortable with not knowing. With being a self, really, is the idea. All right, I have a couple questions that have come on. One general question come up, said, do you plan to put the webinar on the book review of Breaking Up with Sugar in your webinar bank? I missed it live and still want to check it out. Yes, that's just a mistake. I'll fix that. Somebody asked the question, what do you teach our children or spouses to do when they are confronted by one of these 13 things? Using an I feel statement, what else do you recommend? I think just talking about it, slowing it down. Don't turn into the communication police. A lot of children, young adults and adolescent children in our program, turn into the communication police. Harriet Lerner, in her book, The Dance of Anger, which is really a book about boundaries, talks about the obnoxious stage of therapy where people just police each other and confront each other when they make slip-ups. That's just weaponizing the skill. So you just talk about it. An I feel statement is great. I would say, secondly, and maybe even more important, is strike while the iron is cold. Don't bring it up in the moment where it's heated. Bring it up in the moment where it's calm. Hey, I noticed that sometimes we're not in a fight or an argument right now, but the other day this thing came up and I want to talk about it now, because then it's not heated, right? The fight or flight response is not being triggered. So it's easier to communicate. Somebody says, while during this broadcast, my son, who normally does not speak to me, sent me a text. In the text, it was an announcement where he was named the dean's list for the fall semester at his university. I feel he wants me to acknowledge his success and efforts. I will respond that I'm impressed with his efforts that resulted in his making the dean's list. So hard for me not to say proud, the proud word, but I know now what his accomplishment is about, and it's about him, not me. Thank you for continuing to teach us about communication. I'm healing by doing my work. There is no other way. This is the way to make a better relationship with my son. Yes, he went to your program and other aftercare. My work has been as important. Thanks. Wonderful. There's room for praise for somebody's accomplishments. Congratulations. You can be real proud of yourself. You know, my son, who's graduating from high school this year, has been extraordinarily successful academically. And it's taken me a long time to shift from you're gifted and you're a math genius to, and I've said this to him as of late more often because of these ideas, you work your butt off. You know, you have worked as much as I've seen anybody work. And yes, your test scores are off the charts, but that's a testament to the fact that you put in more time than anybody else from a really young age. My oldest child, my 27-year-old, is a really, really talented artist. And I have never seen anybody work harder at their craft than my son. Again, from the youngest age. And I'm learning, and I've learned with this work to talk about the effort that he put in. All right, folks, upcoming parent support groups. I'll be in the Bay Area on Wednesday, February 26th at 7 p.m. at the San Mateo Marriott. We'll have somebody in Portland, Oregon on Friday, March 6th at 6 to 7:30. And in Southern California, Sunday, April 5th. For more information into RSVP, please contact and email Keisha@evoketherapy.com. That's Kaysha, Keisha@evoketherapy.com. Our next parent workshop that we ask all parents to go through is February 15th in our Oregon program. Please talk to your Evoke therapist and see if the timing is right for a field visit. We ask all parents to go. We hold one of these once a month, so we ask you to go. Then we have one in March, at March 7th, in our Utah program. Again, RSVP or inquire by emailing Keisha@evoketherapy.com, Kaysha. If you want to do a deep dive into your work, I can't think of a more valuable use of your time and resources than our Finding You intensives. February is full. We have, I think, one spot left in our March Finding You. That's March 4th. And then April 15th is the one after that. I'll be in England May 8th through 10th. That will fill up. And then we have a Finding You Too, which is almost full in July 15th. Email intensives@evoketherapy.com or go to our website for more information. We have private couples, families, and individual intensives also. Pursuit trips are outdoor trips of any length of time customized for your family or young adults. We ask all parents to attend 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, or Families Anonymous. You can also go to adultchildren.org. Alateen is for teenagers. Refuge Recovery is a Buddhist-inspired recovery program that has less of an emphasis on a higher power. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, is a great place to go for free resources and classes in your area. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app. On your iOS iPhone device, use the podcast app. On an Android device, use the SoundCloud app, or go to soundcloud.com on your computer. Find us on Twitter and Instagram using the handle @EvokeTherapy, and find the Evoke Intensives program on Instagram using the @EvokeTherapyIntensives, @EvokeTherapyIntensives handle. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs, or you can find the Alumni Foundation on Facebook by searching Evoke Family Foundation. The Evoke Therapy blog is on our website. My new book, The Audacity to Be You, Learning to Love Your Horrible Rotten Self, follows the journey of the heroic parent. The Audacity to Be You comes out on February 24th, 3 weeks from today. It'll be available for pre-order here in the coming week or two. You can also go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page on Amazon using the Amazon Smiles program, and then a percentage of the proceeds goes toward the foundation that helps people who can't afford therapy. Any other questions for this evening? Had a good attendance tonight. Maybe I'll change this to 5:30 more often and mix it up a little bit, because that's a lot of really good attendance. Thank you for joining us. My next broadcast, I think I told you last week it would be this, but I had to move it back. I'm going to be reviewing The Dance of Connection by Dr. Harriet Lerner. That'll be next Tuesday, February 11th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. So it's a book along with, we've done The Dance of Anger, we've done The Dance of Fear. I love Dr. Lerner. I love her work. She's a fantastic, insightful therapist and author, so I look forward to sharing that with you. As always, thank you for and on behalf the work that you do. Thank you for showing up, for being willing to look at yourself. It makes a big difference, and it takes a long time and a sustained effort. So thank you for the work you put in for and on behalf of your children and those in your life that you love. Take care, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.